Our next session is India's biggest opportunity for the next decade. Arun Kumar is chairing it. He's the Senior Vice President of AIMA. He's a former Secretary of Commerce for Global Markets and Chairman and CEO of KPMG India. Arun, take it away.
Well, thank you, Solomon. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to be here with my AIMA friends and with the MP of my beautiful hometown, Trivandrum, Shashi Tharoor, here at the Haas School to talk about the India opportunity. I will come to the topic from a hopefully a special vantage point. I lived here in the Bay Area for 34 years, engaging in technology, entrepreneurship, and management consulting through times of incredible change. I then moved in 2014 to Washington to serve in the Obama administration for 3 years. I was the president's lead official to increase US exports and investment into the US. In that capacity, I oversaw economic engagement on behalf of the Department of Commerce with 78 countries. An area where I was most proud of my engagement was India. On the conclusion of the Obama administration, I headed to India, where I now lead KPMG in India, which we have 20,000 professionals in India, and we serve a number of clients, large and small. My firm has actually been honored to serve my distinguished fellow panelists for several years, so thank you. So while I saw India from the outside for many years, first from Silicon Valley, and then from my perch in Washington, DC, I now am very much on the inside of the US-India engagement. On the US-India connection, an inspiring characterization comes to us from America's great poet, Walt Whitman. One might call him America's Tagore. Whitman's great poem, Passage to India, was published at the end of the 19th century. The 19th century had been a period of technological achievement, much as the 20th century has been. At that time, the railroad had crossed America. The Suez Canal had shortened the distance between the West and India. In Passage to India, Whitman expressed excitement for the technological achievements of the West and suggested that they lead towards seeking the wisdom of India, the civilizational achievements that were referred to by a couple of our speakers today. Whitman spoke of the earth to be spanned, connected by network, how prescient that was, and of the far-darting beams of the spirit, the unloosed dream of both scientists and poets. So while Whitman turned to India for its spiritual riches, today the world is looking at India for economic opportunity, as suggested by the title of this session, India, the biggest opportunity for the next decade. I am a believer in the India opportunity and have voted with my feet. I accepted the opportunity to return to India after 4 decades in the US, most of them in the bracing environment of the Bay Area, for 2 reasons. 1, I knew the talent of the people of KPMG India. 2, I had seen in my role as a senior economic official in the Obama administration that the action was going to be in India. At the time that I was in the US government, I had ranked India, ASEAN, and Sub-Saharan Africa as the 3 most high potential areas for growth. Among these, India had the most solid foundation and the administrative capacity for fast progress. My observations today will combine the perspectives, particularly that I developed during my time in DC through conversations with US business leaders. Dow Wilson was one of them who engaged deeply with us in Africa, and many others who engaged with us in India, and my experiences this year in India. So I'll make 7 broad observations. First, it is very clear that investors are looking for policy stability, predictability, and consistency. In particular, they want a stable tax policy environment and tax administration, with reforms focused on lower rates and less bureaucracy. Especially, they're worried about unpredictable bureaucracy. I heard Henry Kravis say to the then finance minister some years ago that we, meaning investors in the US, can take bad news. We know how to manage through that, but what we can't take is unpredictability. So now this is an area where we've seen significant progress on the tax adjudication front there's been significant progress in transfer pricing administration and a huge reduction in the backlog of cases in that area. On predictability, I'm not sure we are home yet. Second, ease of doing business. Here, the Modi government and many state governments have taken the challenge head-on. Now, the history with the Indian government used to be that every time issues were raised about the ease of doing business, the government was generally in denial. We can get things done. I remember one official saying here that, I know there are 2,000 regulations, but I can get it done for you in 3 days. But it meant some personal intervention at the highest levels. I think with this government, they've essentially said, it's our problem, we've taken it on, it's on us. We're not arguing about it. In fact, Modi said very significantly in a speech at Madison Square Garden on his visit in September 2014, he said India's number 189 or something it was on ease of doing business. I'm going to make it in the first 50. I thought, very bold statement, because he took the problem on. He didn't deny the problem. Now, in reality, what have we seen? We've seen some significant reforms. The goods and services tax has been passed and is now being implemented. At the end of September, we'll see what the effects of that is, because the first quarter will be done, and hopefully we'll get a first-hand feel of how it's been implemented. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the IBC, is a very significant reform. It finally shows that there is a way to exit investments. If you're an investor, you also want to know how to exit if things go badly. The real estate regulatory reform is another piece of legislation that's important. Now, while the GST will benefit the economy in creating a unified market, really a unified common market in India for the first time, and it will also bring the informal sector into the formal economy, the IBC aims to consolidate multiple laws governing bankruptcy proceedings and essentially is oriented towards achieving a speedy resolution. The real estate regulatory reform seeks to bring transparency and accountability in that sector. Then along with that is the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, which was amended to provide for time-bound arbitrations for commercial disputes. Today, it can take 1,400 days in a lucky situation to settle a dispute. So these are all very positive steps in terms of ease of doing business. Now, there are a number of other areas where there needs to be progress. I think Shashi mentioned that 200 days is not really 200 days. I mean, the 200 days is still in vogue in some places. But I would tell you that in some states, I see a lot of progress. I see Gujarat, I see Andhra, I see Kerala as places where people feel that they can actually do business and get things done in a very transparent way. The third area would be the move towards liberalization of foreign direct investment. The FDI regime has been further liberalized, with multiple sectors being opened up for 100% FDI. In the defense sector, FDI is allowed up to 49%, and the new strategic partnership policy paves the way for foreign OEMs to collaborate with Indian firms to make defense equipment. This is really important because it allows an investor who's building defense equipment to have a line of sight into what kinds of volumes can be bought by the defense forces. 51% FDI is now allowed in multi-brand retail, but there are some daunting conditions still in that area. And in e-commerce, 100% has been allowed for the e-commerce marketplace model. Now, these are all positive steps. The Foreign Investment Promotion Board, the FIPB, has been disbanded, and individual departments of the government now have the responsibility to clear FDI proposals in consultation with the DIPP. Fourth, the competition between states, which is now called competitive federalism, is an important factor to make investments more welcome. This is a feature that I saw firsthand here in the US. Here, states compete actively with each other to bring investments into the US. In my organization, in the US government, we ran every year a big conference called the Select USA Investment Summit. And to this, we would have all the states and all the economic development organizations come, and we'd have 2,500 investors from abroad, and the states would be competing for their investments. So it's a great place to show how states can attract investment. So I'm seeing similar trends where I see, Chandrababu Naidu was out here in April, wooing investment. Other chief ministers are out here in the country very often, wooing investment. So that competition between the states is going to be a really important factor for investors who are looking at India. So the states will also benefit from the transparent auction of natural resources. For instance, about $50 billion is expected to come from the auction of 67 coal blocks, which will be conducted over the next 20 to 30 years. And states like Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh are likely to receive substantial sums each. There are areas now where significant progress is still needed. Labor law reform is an important area, and land acquisition is another area where we have to see a lot more progress. Fifth, the government is making progress, and some would argue not fast enough, towards privatization, or at least moving public sector enterprises towards market accountability by listing them. The government is working on consolidating and even listing large enterprises, for instance, the large insurance companies. The State Bank of India has merged into itself a number of its subsidiaries with the aim to consolidate and streamline operations. It would be interesting to see what will happen on the Air India front. Sixth, and this was mentioned by a couple of speakers, infrastructure. This has been an area of progress in airports, ports, and power. Today, in many parts of the country, there actually is surplus power, a situation that you could not imagine a few years ago. Now, the problem now is in the area of distribution of power. We've seen interest in investment in infrastructure. We've seen large global pension funds, especially from Canada and the Middle East, investing directly to India. The overhaul of the approach to PPP, with the government taking more of the upfront risk, and also the introduction of the hybrid annuity model are also helpful developments. Seventh, there is an increasing focus on corporate governance in the country. Business families and founders, called promoters in Indian parlance, are professionalizing their enterprises and often giving up control. This provides private equity investors with large opportunities of the order of $15 to $20 billion every year. In terms of corporate governance, this will be an imperfect transition because India has to create its own path that combines the promoters' long-term horizons and long-term commitments to their enterprises with the fiduciary responsibilities to other shareholders. So I've laid out 7 different areas where I feel there's progress towards that's attractive for investors looking at India. Now I look forward to the perspectives of my fellow panelists. Each of them is a leader in their industries and on the national business scene. So let me quickly introduce them and then we'll have the speakers. Mohandas Pai is today the chairman of Manipal Global Education, among many other pursuits. He was the chief financial officer of Infosys from 1994 to 2006 and was instrumental in transforming the firm into one of the world's most respected and widely known software service companies. Pramod Bhasin, is an expert in the field of fintech, analytics, and financial services. He truly is a pioneer in the business process outsourcing industry, having founded Genpact in 1997. Starting with just 20 employees, he transformed it into one of the first large-scale outsourcing companies in the world, and his example has been followed many times over. Today, we have a very large BPO industry in India. Shrinivas Dempo, again, is the chairman of Goa's leading conglomerate, engaged in various businesses, including foods, travel, media, shipbuilding, and carbon manufacturing. On this panel, he represents the real manufacturing industry, which many feel is critically important to India's future. Next, Mohandas will speak, followed by Pramod, and then we will have time for questions, and finally, Shrinivas will conclude the session with his observations. Mohandas.
So I press this button, right? This one. That's right. Arun, thank you very much for this kind invitation. I'm making a presentation so that we have a lot of data on which we can argue. This is about India 2030, how the next generation is going to make India a $10 trillion economy. We were the second largest economy in the world for many years. Now by 2030, we'll be among the top 5 in nominal terms. We are number 3 in PPP, but we'll be in the top 5 nominal term by 2030. Data, 1.31 billion people. So I want to say to all of you, anybody from any part of the world can come to India with any social theory, find data to justify their theory. Everything is there in India. So please be kind to India. Please don't judge India, because none of us who live in India understand India is so huge. Far less our politicians who go speak about India, they just don't understand India because it's so very large. Population growth is 1.3% a year. Stability is 1.1. The whole of South India has a fertility rate of 1.7. I think Shashi's state has 0.9 because they only grew by 5% in the last 10 years in population. And today, there is 9% of population, which is not from Kerala, from Bihar and other places, and thus expanding at a faster pace. Life expectancy is low. You heard of the health problem. It can only improve. But we brought down maternal mortality to 177 per 100,000 births, and infant mortality to something like 35 per 1,000 births. Literacy is 79%, a great failure for India. We have 95% literacy for children in the age group, for people in the age group of 15 to 65. GDP is $2.25 trillion in nominal terms, growing at 6% plus. GDP in PPP is 8.87%. I'm sure you know all about that. Per capita income nominal is quite low, but it makes do because for a family of 5, if you have a per capita income, something like $8,000 is not bad at all. Export imports is growing, government external borrowings is quite low, and external debt is not too high. The key challenge for us economically is our interest payment to gross government revenue is 23%. That's why we have a poor rating, because government pays interest at 7.5%. I think the US government pays about 3%. Look at this. Last 26 years, majority of which Shashi's government ruled. From 1991, when India opened up, till now, we have grown at 8.4% in dollars CAGR. I only wish Shashi's party will take credit for it and talk to people with data about the good work they've done. They opened up India, India grew at 8.4%. At the same time, a political leader whom Shashi admires so much, was the first prime minister, made sure that India grew at 3.5% a year from 1950 to 1991 because of socialistic policies. They shut down a free trade country and constrained us and bound us, and India didn't grow. It's called the Hindu rate of growth in a very derisive manner. So this is a very important fact. We have grown 8.4%. And you must not forget that. So we can grow at that pace for the next 25 years. Export imports have grown. Per capita income at 6.8%. Savings rate has grown. Our share in world trade was 3% in 1947. Shashi's government brought it down to 1% in 1991. But changed their mind and opened up India. We are now at 4.2%. So we have grown pretty well. And this is something Shashi's government should take pride. They actually had 2 years of 9.6% growth. That's pretty good. But that was led by high inflation because of wrong policies and high subsidies. And the effect of inflation, 10% a year for 5 years continuously, led to the fall of the government. And we had a new government, which is trying to repair the damage. But we hopefully will overcome this in future. This is a very nice slide. We are 10 years, 12 years behind China. It's very important, 12 years behind China. China opened up in 1978. Our political leaders took some time to get wisdom. They opened up in 1991 when India was almost broke. But China grew at 9.9% a year from 1979 to 2011. No country on this planet has ever grown at that pace for a long period of time. The difference between India and China has been, in my view, women's participation in the workforce. Women's part of the workforce is 24% in India. In China, it's close to 80%. And the result of the bad policies for 55 years of a government that Shashi's party did. They didn't educate a woman. They didn't educate a woman, then invest in a woman, oppressed a woman. Mao in 1949 said, women hold up half of heaven, and educated China's women, and you can see this tremendous work done by women. Because women in every society are change agents, and India needs to educate a women and take care of them to make sure that India grows. In Kerala they did, but since they were communists, all they do is agitate. There are no jobs in Kerala. Well, look at this. This is a very important slide. By 2021, the world is going to change. What happened in 1850 when Europe overtook Asia in terms of economic power is reversing in 2021. The United States will be the greatest country in the world for the next century. Nobody can overtake the United States. China is trying, but an open society will always dominate, and the whole world wants to come to the United States, but not China. But EU is stagnating. They're spending 25% of world spending, 40% of world spending on social sector as against 25% share in GDP. Japan is stagnant with a declining population. China will grow, India will grow, but the rest of the world will grow faster, and this will have geopolitical impact in the next few years. We are at an inflection point in the long history of humanity. India, China, we have to compare. China's 1.38, population grew at 0.43% in the last 10 years. Currently, India is growing at 1.3. The life expectancy is higher. Economy is 5 times India. GDP is 2.5 times in PPP terms. They are the factory of the world, largest exporter, largest importer, largest foreign currency reserves, and gross debt to GDP is 260%. If India becomes a China, the world will not have enough resources. So we have to make sure that our growth is not concomitant with a lot of less unsustainable practices. So we have to change the way we grow, and the Indian government has promised that we'll consume less energy than our GDP growth, which is good for the planet. We are 17% of humanity consume 8% of the world's energy. The United States is 6% of humanity consumes 17%. We can't be like the US. This is one of the challenges that India has, too much of subsidies because of bad governance. So if you don't govern people well, give them subsidies to get votes. The policy failed in 2013-14. Now subsidies on oil have been cut, so we got more money for investment in infrastructure. We have a strong industrial base. We are not a third world country. Second largest producer of steel in the world after China. Second largest capacity of cement in the world after China. Largest producer of two-wheelers. Sixth largest producer of four-wheelers. 500 million square feet of construction every single year. Bangalore observes 11 million square feet of grade A office space, the largest in the world for each of the last 15 years. IT BPO, $175 billion, in the top 5 in the world. If you take the street value in American value terms, this is equal to $300 billion. Power, we are among the top 4 producers of power. Cellular phones, we're second largest in the world. Please don't compare us with Finland, Singapore, and everybody else. Compare us with China. Compare us with the United States. Because if you compare Finland and Singapore, they're small countries. India cannot be a Singapore. India cannot be nimble. It's a very large country. Population, we have 65% of our population age group 15 to 64. We are a very, very young country. And this has its own challenges. Look at this. India by 2020 will have a young population average age of 29 years. Japan is 48. For Japan's population is declining for the last many years. Last year, I think 850,000 children were born, 1.25 million Japanese died. The largest selling, let's say, adult diapers sell more than baby diapers in China. In Japan. China's average age is 37. People say China could become older before it becomes richer, but India is young. We have a large educational infrastructure, 800 universities, 51,000 colleges. The only places in the world where you have affiliation colleges is Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. We're not proud of it, but we have not had reforms in education because the government controls education very fast. Shashi's government ruled for 10 years. They spoke about it, did nothing. The current government is trying to work for 3 years. They've not done much at all. We need reforms. We have 35 million young people in college. And of course, the top 20% are very good. The bottom 20%, well. Look at this slide. We have good savings. Our savings rate is 30% of GDP. Our investment rate is about, again, 32% of GDP. Consumption is 70%. Investment is 30%. Shashi's government drew down investment in the last 3 years of the rule. Savings came down because of high inflation. The new government is trying to recover. Hopefully, we'll go back to a 37-38% investment rate in the next 2 or 3 years. But it's going to be a tough, hard struggle. And that's why the GDP growth is slightly constrained, because there's not enough private investment because of the excesses of the past. And this is an important slide in 2014. India's services, 53% now is gone up. Industry is 29%. China is a factory of the world with 40% share of GDP. Our fundamental challenge is we have 45% of population dependent on agriculture, which is 15% of GDP growing at 3%. 55% of population depends on service and industry, which is growing at 8%. So the divergence of income between those on the land and those outside the land is widening, and that is creating social tension. China moved 300 million people from the land to the factory and services in the last 15 years. India moved only 150 million. We got to move faster with the latest data. The startup ecosystem with young people, dreamers, I know you have a dreamer problem in the United States, but our dreamers are now helping to create a $10 trillion economy. And this is what is exciting about India, because our young people dream and they want to grow a big country, and Shashi is a cheerleader. We have a large startup system in India, 26,000 startups. All the stories of the startups are in a portal called Your Story. Everybody else has got a different number, but all these names are there in that portal. 270% growth in 6 years. They created $90 billion of value for the last 5 years. Third largest startup ecosystem in the world, and we raised about $4 billion in 16. This year, we already got about $5 billion in half the year, except only 10% of the investment in startups comes from Indian capital. In China, 65% of investment is in Chinese capital. But our capital is led by Sunil and others, and Pramod are trying to bring up the percentage, but it's a heavy uphill struggle. I hope you invest more, Pramod, next year. Yeah. By 2025, we hope to have 100,000 startups in India, creating 3.5 million jobs, $500 billion in market value, and we'll be number 2 after the United States. We're very happy to be number 2 after the United States because the US and India are linked together very closely. Let me give you data. The US has 4.5 to 6 million people working in IT, depending on what industries you classify. Out of that, 1 million are of Indian origin. American companies are 2 million Indians working for them in India. So out of 8 million people in America and IT, 3 million are Indians. So we link together. And we're going to change the world together. And our technology progress, along with the innovation in the Silicon Valley, is going to make the world a beautiful place to work for the next 10 years. We have $175 billion of revenue in IT. 4.25 million people are employed. The rise of IT, because like they said, the government kept away. But I must praise Shashi's government with opening up and changing the policy in 91 that really helped. Though they say one of the leaders in 1982 thought of what is going to happen in the Valley 25 years later and opened up in 82, which is wrong. But I think we've done a fantastic job. This is what has saved India in the last 25 years. Bangalore dominates. We have a traffic problem. We have 7 million vehicles for a population of 10 million. But we're going to get through it in the next few years. Pramod said Delhi is better than Bombay, but I know none of you want to go to Delhi. Trivandrum is even better. There's nothing there. It's peaceful, and you can sleep at night, and there's no traffic problems. There are startups across all sectors. You can see it here. Yeah, Bangalore is sit 1.5 hours in traffic, but there's a traffic problem in SFO too, right? We have problems of prosperity all over the world. We have many unicorns in India. These are some 8 unicorns. 2 more have come up since I left India. I read in the press. Valuations are pretty good. We're having Masa from SoftBank pouring money into India because he wants to dominate India. Just like he was an investor in SoftBank, in Alibaba, he wants to invest in Flipkart to run India. I want to say this to all of you. Google owns India. Flipkart owns India. And Twitter owns India. Now, Amazon wants to own India. The Chinese didn't allow them to come. And they created companies, 3 companies, $1 trillion valuation. We Indians are very open. We allowed the whole world to come in. Now, these companies dominate India. We could become a digital colony of all these countries in the next 10 years. And Sashi, we need legislation to prevent that. Give us back our second freedom. 30 companies, we got B2B companies too. They got good valuation. We can see that. Startup valuations are going to grow. I'm rushing because I don't have time. 100 startups, we see all this happening. We had good exits, very good exits. The small exits, you won't hear of them, 5 million, 10 million. Nobody wants to write in the media. They want to write about billion-dollar exits, but we have had good exits. Now, digitization is impacting every single Indian at the bottom of the pyramid. People are using their mobile phone to do commerce. Women are using it to talk to each other and to chat and use WhatsApp to compare notes. We're seeing empowerment of an unprecedented scale because of the technology innovation. What will the future of startups look like? There are 3 things happening. The startup ecosystem is expanding, smartphone penetration, and the India stack, one of the biggest innovations in the world, with Vinod acknowledge that India has. And for Vinod to acknowledge something about India is fantastic. This is India Stack is developed by volunteers in Bangalore, not Delhi. They happen to be in Bangalore, which has got 4 layers, a consent layer, cashless layer, paperless layer, presenceless layer. And this has led to 300 million bank accounts being opened in the last 3 years. It's led to the creation of what we call UPI, universal payment interface where money is transferred across bank accounts at almost no cost. We got Aadhaar, which Nandan Nilekani did, and I'll give you some data, eKYC, e-sign, digital locker, etc. All this has been created as a public good. And this has helped India create this kind of a fabulous infrastructure. Aadhaar, 1 billion by 2016. This costs only $2 billion. Any other country in the West, to design this will cost you $2 billion. We got it done for $2 billion, and we had 1 billion people on Aadhaar, and it actually works. In India, the left always criticizes and says that Aadhaar can be compromised. It cannot be compromised. Because some governments in India, they're way behind the curve. They take your Aadhaar number and put it on the web for transparency purposes. And this private data, they don't understand what privacy means. The Supreme Court has now said privacy is a fundamental right for us, so hopefully it'll improve. India stack built on JAM. You can look at these numbers, the great numbers for any country, and the very big numbers. 600 million to 950 million in Aadhaar is fantastic. And then our banks are changing. Raghuram Rajan came to India and helped change India. In 3 years, he gave licenses to 21 banks. He opened up everything. Sadly, he's gone back to Chicago, but I think, hopefully what he did will really help us. And our banks were all nationalized by the Shashi's party. And they're the compromise and nationalized. Now we're trying to open them up and give the private sector a chance to come. Look here, 300 million accounts, mobile 350 million, smartphones, 1.06 million phone numbers, 800 million have phone connections, 1.16 billion Aadhaar. We have 1.30 million people and 24 million babies born here. Some of these kids for 5 years too seems to have an Aadhaar here. And choosing as the preferred mode, look at the level of transactions here. 21 million came to e-sign in 24 months, DigiLocker 4.8 million, authentications per month is 800 million, and all these are large numbers. Where do you see these large numbers? Which country can make these large numbers happen in a short period of time? This is the height of tech innovation. Everything we spoke about in the morning, but the bottom of the pyramid is happening here. Aadhaar is taking off. This is just some piece of data. India stack taking off, eKYC. What has been the impact of all this? Retail customers onboarding is come down from 6 days to 1 hour with actual data because of the India stack, because of Aadhaar, because of eKYC. Things have become electronic now. India stack, large asset manager for a mutual fund, onboarding is come down from 4 hours to 2 minutes. Transaction time is down. These are actual data taken from some of the big guys. Telecom, 1 day to 4 minutes for getting a eKYC done for a telecom number for Jio. Jio did that. They were doing some 600,000 people, Jio numbers, new numbers per day. They got about 125 million in 9 months is free. And they said Indians consume 35 GB of data per month, largely for seeing movies, Bollywood movies, not the kind of movies people want to see somewhere. 25 million smartphones per quarter, which is fantastic. These are great numbers, 25 million smartphones, but all Chinese. We don't have a smartphone industry. If the Chinese coming down and selling us smartphones, and people say there's some devices there, but all the information goes elsewhere, Shashi, is a great problem for us. We need a law to protect our privacy. We are going to go from data poor to data rich in 5 years. Social, commerce, payment, paperless, digital. And we're going to be data rich, enormous amount of data, big data, deep learning, artificial intelligence, everything is happening in India. In the last 9 months, 500 startups using AI come up in Bangalore. We're the first startup AI fund in which I'm an LP come up in Bangalore about 6 months ago. So we're seeing this kind of AI, ML, all the buzzwords you heard them say in the morning is actually happening in India. How big it is, I don't know, but it's actually happening. Now, to increase market size by 10x to 50x and grow exponentially, which fund I think my big friend Vikram wants to have a fund for exponential companies, the cost of business and transaction has to come down. GST is getting one single national market. Today, to go from Bangalore to Delhi takes 30% less time. $10 billion of bribes are gone. Because earlier, every state, 29 states, the border, you got to pay a bribe. Now there are no bribes. Of course, the people who took bribes are thinking of innovative ways how to stop them. Hopefully, they'll get some little bit of bribes. But things are happening in this country. We have a national market for goods for the first time after 70 years. Paperless instant credit markets are happening. In 30 minutes, they say, we're going to give you a loan. These companies are startups funded by equity, largely from the United States. They're not yet come to a state when they have to recover their money. We don't know what's going to happen. The money may not come back, but equity is fueling a credit market, and they're giving loans to a lot of people every 30 minutes. But recovery is something that's physical. So new age platforms are digitizing. Enormous amount of digitizing happening all over India. Supply chain, customers, digital footprints to use big data. Aggregators are coming in. Now jobs. We had a debate about jobs. Now we think that there'll be work, but jobs will be few. The formal sector employment will come down. But I want to tell you, Shashi, there are 100 million people in formal jobs. Database Employee Provident Fund has got 46 million people who are paying contributions every month. Private funds have got 10 million. Government has got 25 million people on the payroll. All this is data. And your government produces jobs. Jobs grew at 7% a year CAGR between 2004 and 2014 when you went up power. Yet, you wrote an economic report to say jobs are growing at 0.5% a year. Totally bunkum. You guys didn't know what we're doing. You must take credit for this. I got data. You know, we got aggregators who are coming forward to run Ola, Uber. 1.5 million cars have come up. 1.5 million people are employed. Our lives have become easier, but traffic has become pretty bad because there are too many of these people with cars. But these aggregators have got only 6,500 jobs, but they manage 1.5 million cars. And all these are happening in practice, in the health area. Hospitals are getting connected, and we got there's aggregators for cars. We got people like Paytm who do a mobile wallet with money from China, and now they changed the business model to a payment bank. We don't know what happened to the mobile wallets, but all young people use the mobile wallets because they give a cash back of 20%. By 100 rupees, you get 20 rupees back. It's fantastic. So, ushering change, Bharat. You know, rural India is called Bharat. Bharat is embracing change at a time never known before. Reliance Jio, the big beast in the room, is announced a phone for 1,500 rupees. That's $25. A smartphone-like thing for $25, free of cost. They're not going to charge you. And they're giving it away. Hopefully, they're giving it away. And we are told the government they must give a Modi phone to 50 million BPL women, Shashi. That'll be a killer. So all these women can talk to the Prime Minister and tell him about what is happening to them. I think you must do it too from your party. So, hundreds of experiments because of digitization, low barriers to entry, and a lot of robust foundations, hundreds and thousands of happening. Dr. Solomon, please come to India and do much more. We wanted to impact 300 million people. 30,000 is not enough. All your students should come. Get them for the last 5 years, spread them across the country. In 10 years, let us remake 17% of humanity. It's a big challenge for you. You're a pioneer. Thank you. So India is optimizing to empower problem solvers, and we think these young people, the next generation, are going to change India in a manner never before. If 17% of humanity change, they solve the health problem, they solve all the problems, the world will be a better place. It's happening before our eyes. The next 10 years are going to be the most exciting period of our economic life, and I think we are the heart of it. It's a great time to be an Indian, and please come to India. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. After a presentation like that from Mohan, it's hard to get more data up on the screen or to able to even talk about more data. Mohan and Shashi, I wish you had told me I was going to be part of a political debate here. My speech would have been quite different, because what I do like about them is now we have a Shashi party, and obviously we must have a Mohan party. And clearly, you know, Shashi's party brings in Aadhaar, Mohan's party implements it. Shashi's party brings in Raghuram Raju, Mohan's party sends him home. And education happens, and you know, Shashi's party doesn't do anything on education, and Mohan's party does even less. So it's actually a perfect rejoinder. And I can go on about this, by the way, guys. I'm trying to be neutral here, but my biases are showing. Lies, damn lies, and statistics and data combined are the most potent force that we have to use to convince everyone. So I am also, if I may, part of the dinosaur that Vinod Khosla talked about, I'm a 25-year GE veteran, and at this point, completely incapable of any kind of innovation. But I want to talk to you about innovation because we did a lot of innovation. I have to tell you a story. I'm considered the pioneer of the BPO industry, and I went back to India after working for GE Capital here for many years on Wall Street. We were doing leveraged buyouts. I'd gone back. I wasn't making enough money, and I was getting increasing pressure from Jack Welch and others to say, why aren't you going to make enough money? Why are you running a popcorn stand? And at that point in time, I was wandering around and said, well, why don't we do business process outsourcing from India and use the talent pool that we had collected to serve the rest of the world? Now, I'm asked a lot about where did this idea come from, and it came from necessity and a desire to keep my job at that point in time. There was no other science to it. I also happened to call, and this is the change of India that I want to talk to you about. I also happened to call my boss at that time, Gary Wendt, who was a legendary head of GE Capital, wonderful guy, really inspirational. And I called him on the phone, and I was trying to describe to him my idea that we would do all this processing, not of call centers, because that's not really what we did, but of high-end processing over phone lines. But the problem in those days was your phone line would keep dropping, so I'd have to keep calling him back. And at which point in time, doubting my credibility, he did ask me, he said, are you suggesting you're going to close the books of GE Capital from India over these dubious phone lines through which you and I can hardly converse? And my answer to him was, yes, I'm going to give it a damn good try. I also asked 10 other people in India whether it would work. All of them said no. And to Vinod Khosla's point, I think sometimes you make change by playing at the edges. And the moment they said no to me, I said, we have to try this. We have to go out. It's an industry that employs over 1 million people. We were the pioneers, by the way, of this industry in China. I took it to Dalian, where we serve Japan from there. Dr. Lal, I will take you to Dalian since you're such a fan of China, as I know from our earlier discussions. And we've done it in Guatemala and Mexico and Eastern Europe and so on and so forth, and really been there. But I'm here to talk to you about India. I think Nainan was the guy at Business Standard who had a great saying that said, India is a country where the future is bright and always will be, right? Because we were never going to meet that promise. When I was sent back to GE Capital, I was sent back to find that mythical 250 million middle class. I told my bosses, I said, send me back to India. I will find those 250 million middle class people, and I will lend them money, and I will provide them consumer loans. 3 years later, I hadn't found them, and I remember my HR head coming by and telling me, Pramod, you told us there are 250 million middle-class people in India. I want to meet them. I want to see where they are. I want to know why you can't find them. And it took us a long time to get past that stage. I became an entrepreneur with Genpact. So I have a background of having built an organization, come up with an idea, built a new business, as well as being part of a multinational. And I have gone through the pains and ups and downs of India in all its myriad forms many, many times. I've gone through the RBI, waking up one morning. We used to borrow money from banks to lend to others. And I woke up one morning and the RBI had told banks not to lend to NBFCs, a non-bank finance company, which is what we were, anymore. And at that point in time, I had commitments to customers. And I was sitting there watching the story and saying, now what do I do? We've gone through the fits and pluses of taxes being reversed. Our wonderful president, Pranab Mukherjee, who's the former finance minister of Shashi's party, as I would say, and I'm sorry, it's teed up. The golf ball is teed up. It's too easy to hit it. So with Mohan and Shashi. But, the Vodafone case, which affected a lot of people, worried a lot of people, came through. So we have a habit of going forward and going backwards. And I have been a cynic of our country in many, many cases. A cynic because our infrastructure stays woefully is inadequate. Our education system is inadequate. There are so many things. But I will tell you that I'm here to stand and tell you that never in my life have I felt more optimistic about the country I live in and the country I belong to. And to that, I agree with Mohan. Mohan and I, by the way, rarely agree on most things, but on this one point, we are in total agreement that we're at the unprecedented opportunity facing us. So let me tell you why. And I'm not going to talk about the hard data that Mohan can present far more eloquently than I can, but I will present to you what I think are the soft factors that go into making India such a profound economy which will change and help change the world in the future. And I liken it to the economies of Silicon Valley, of Israel, of Scandinavia, and many other countries where the ecosystems have produced an ability to produce entrepreneurship and wealth creation, not just because of the hard facts, but very much because of the soft power and the soft facts that surround them. It is, again, what Shashi was talking about. The power of soft power is sorely underestimated, but today I think that language has changed enormously. We've talked about demographics. We've talked about, what we haven't talked about is the enormous rise out of poverty of middle-class Indians over the last 20 years. That rise has been exponential. Perhaps China has done more because their industrial growth has been higher, but the rise of Indians out of poverty has been unprecedented on a scale second only to China, and that produces wealth, and that produces aspirations, and that produces inclusiveness. Financial inclusion has been amazing. Over the last year or so, we have opened Jan Dhan Yojana, 150 million bank accounts. Are they all being used? Of course not. Did demonetization come in as a wave to stop everything? And can I tell you this very funny story? So I was sitting in front of a TV camera, CNBC Awaaz, to talk about Trump's president election victory. And I was furious about it, et cetera, and I was pontificating when the TV ended, and suddenly they said there's an announcement from the prime minister, and we sat and watched it, and then, of course, he had announced demonetization, and the news anchor came back to us and said, now would you like to comment on demonetization? And all of us were trying to figure out what the hell has hit us at that point in time. And it was something very profound. The jury is certainly out on whether it worked or not, but India has this ability to take 2 steps forward, sometimes 1 step back, sometimes 3 steps back, sometimes 5 steps forward. And we will continue to do that in fits and starts. Whose party? Correct. Very important. Geo, Mohan's talked about. The impact of Geo and the way it's been implemented, we may all disagree with the business model, we may question it, is unprecedented. There is no one in the world who is right. What he is doing is what Amazon is trying to do to the world of online. He's grabbing market share in a way which is unprecedented. But at the same time, the tech stack and other things that come into place are all the hard facts. But far more important to me is what's happening culturally. And culturally, timing is perfect. The rise of entrepreneurship in India is exponential. The network effect, and again, what Mohan talked about, is creating thousands and thousands of new entrepreneurs every day. Regrettably, for Mohan and for Mohan's party, I must tell him that Delhi is now the startup hub and startup capital of the country, has more startups than Bangalore, has more investment than Bangalore. His own numbers showed that, by the way, that the amount of investment in Delhi is greater than in Bangalore. And Delhi will continue to overtake it because Bangalore, you can't do too much while sitting in a traffic jam, right? Delhi, at least you can go out and do other things, and you can expand outside. Gurgaon can continue to expand. That's a good thing, right? So at least that's what I claim, right? We were the first in Gurgaon in '96, so my heart is there, I'm afraid. We had, I'll tell you, I'm the president of TIE in NCR. We had 10,000 people attend a startup event 2 weeks ago in one day. 200 startups, 70 investors, 10,000 people attending. The range of startups was from everywhere, from healthcare to agriculture to food to entertainment to financial inclusion to solar energy, and you can talk about it, and it is flooding in. And the network effect in India is massive because, you know, when I first went back to India, NBFCs were the scene, non-bank finance companies. And if you overturned a rock, there was a new NBFC being formed. Then it became IT companies, and the failed NBFCs converted into technology companies, but it was all fueled by the rise, of course, of companies, such great companies like Infosys and Wipro and others who were examples. And then it became BPO companies, and today it's entrepreneurship. So there is a herd mentality. There are lots of people with terrible ideas trying to be entrepreneurs. But the effect this is happening, it's also happening because we don't have enough jobs. We just don't have enough jobs, so people are being forced. But every college, every institution, every university I go to today is being powered by the power of incubators, accelerators, ways to promote entrepreneurship. You can't make entrepreneurs easily. It's a very hard thing to do. And we shouldn't confuse ourselves and say everybody in India is going to become an entrepreneur. It's very hard to do. There are too many failures. But at the heart of it, the movement is very infectious. So what has this done? What it has done from a business perspective, one more story. So I have to tell you why entrepreneurship is now different. When I had thought about Genpact, we were going to spin it off. We were going to get private equity in. We were going to spin it off from GE because GE didn't want to do that much. It wasn't strategic. And I spun it off, and we are now a New York Stock Exchange public listed company. I was an owner and chairman, CEO, all of that stuff. And I went to my mother, and I told my mother, I said, Mom, I'm going to quit GE Capital, and I'm going to join this company called Genpact. It's an offshoot of GE. And she looked at me, and this was many years ago when multinational was a thing. She looked at me and said, son, are you mad? Would you leave a company? Why would you leave a company like GE? And I said, well, because it's a good move, it's a good opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. And she asked me a couple of times if I was mad. She proceeded then to go around and ask my sister if everything was okay. That's why I wasn't telling her the truth, and why would I ever want to become an entrepreneur. And then she finally got around to asking me the question she always wanted to ask me, which was, did GE fire you, and is this the only option left in your life at this point in time? I think those days are gone. Those points of failures, the acceptance of failure is gone. There is a bigger safety net. People can get jobs. People are now in companies looking for people who have failed, who have tried, and who have failed. It's not that easy to make this happen, but in India, our demographics and the youth of our country and the optimism that I see in their faces will make this happen. So distribution, which was our huge problem in India in terms of making money, has changed. You can now reach out faster than you ever could, and that's a fundamental change. This is beyond Mohan's party or Shashi's party. Nobody else can change that. This is happening regardless of what happens out there. And at the same time, you have massive opportunity. It doesn't matter which area you look in. Housing, financial services, healthcare, agri, pharma. You can go across textiles, food. There's a new beer being brought out called Bira. I recommend everybody have it. It's a young entrepreneur. He's brought it out. He's brought out an IPA version. There's new malt whiskeys coming out. There's great wines coming out. You know, it's flourishing. When I go out and say, Vikram's wife Seema used to do organic foods, the quality and the caliber of that food and the range is unprecedented. And this is all beginning to hit us. There are many dinosaurs like me who don't shop online, et cetera, but many others who love this are beginning to see the range of diversity of product. There will be no time left before we start exporting this. And people will swiftly get to a point where they can start exporting it. Will India be easy to do business? No. In 3 years' time, under Mohan's party, we have moved from 134 to 131 in terms of ease of doing business. That's not a good news story. But the fact is, we're finding many, many ways to work around the system. We don't have to depend on the system anymore. The reason the BPO IT industry thrived is because we didn't need many licenses. We were able to get up and running. The reason the telecom industry is thriving is because that regulatory environment has eased up completely. So there's lots of unprecedented opportunities. We want investment. We need the brains. We need your help. I'll take some examples. Look at Uday Kotak. Uday and I started, he ran his finance company. I started with GE Capital. I thought I was the king. I was running GE Capital in Asia. I could have done lots of things, et cetera, et cetera. Uday built his bank slowly. He brought Goldman Sachs in as a partner. At some point, he told them politely, thank you, but no thank you. You can go home now. Thank you very much. Uday is now worth $14 billion. His bank is worth about $20 billion. The RBI is forcing him to sell his shares, which he does so very reluctantly and very slowly. And he's a great friend, and he's a classic example of how much wealth creation opportunity there really is in India. I'm just using his example only because I know him so well, and it's been fantastic. Last 2 points. Please think about a typical entrepreneur in India today. They're typically from a family which has no mentorship. They have no one to go to for advice. The issues they face are operating issues. They're not regulatory capital structure issues. They need help to go to market. They need help with connection. They need help how to recruit. How do you do contract? They have no ability to look around them, read a newspaper, read case studies. The internet is there, but it seems so far away. The real world of America and Israel, everywhere, seems so far away from their reality. But if we can help them, the number of new ideas out there are so substantial, it is actually fantastic. So I would just suggest a couple of things. India will be hard to do business, but it represents opportunity which is unparalleled in this world today. We must grab it. There are many ways to do it right, and there are many ways to do it wrong. I had a session with Jeff Immelt when he was in India, and I'd called all the successful business people in India to that table, and Jeff was at that time complaining a little bit about, I can say this now because he's left GE, and I'm safe. And at that point in time, he had said, we are not happy with India. And one of my very close friends who was sitting there, who Sunil knows very well, looked at him and said, Jeff, I wonder why multinationals that fail in India have a habit of blaming the country instead of blaming their own management. Perhaps you should try and change that. Fortunately, he wasn't talking about me at that point in time. But India will be hard, but India's problems are unique, and India's problems represent a massive opportunity. There are local solutions, and the best companies in India have found them. HDFC Bank, Hero Motors, Maruti, so many others, they have found these solutions. They are profitable, they go through their hassle, but ultimately, they are entirely successful. We can apply technology across industries, and we can leapfrog. And with that, I would just encourage you, please come to India. We need your brains. We need your presence. If I may say so, we would love to have your money. Thank you very much.
I'll answer these two questions. Education. India produces 300,000 MBAs. About 75,000 are pretty good. Maybe 20,000 will become entrepreneurs. We're seeing a trend. IITs graduate 10,000 engineers. 3,000 this year want to be entrepreneurs. They don't want to have jobs. We want them to come to America and get a PhD, but they're not coming here. We feel very sad because we want more PhDs. So it's happening in a way. And about your question, what can you do for India? First, be sympathetic to India and look at the positive aspects. Second, when you come for Education India, look at all the people who are delivering education, see how to take them from grade A to grade B. There are a lot of institutions. Help them upgrade the quality, train the teachers, use technology to improve the quality of education. Access we have done. Quality has to be improved. But quality is a challenge all over the world. But if you work with them and do this, I think it'll make a tremendous difference because you can be a catalyst.
So if I may, on education, making money in education anywhere in the world is actually very hard. So a lot of this, I will tell you very openly, is going to have to be something that you want to do from your heart. And then you can make a huge impact on a large part of India. Your answer question about China and India, we don't have to compare against China, but let's remember that the fastest growing economies in the world in the past and the most developed countries are all democracies. It's our version of democracy that perhaps we need to change. There are 2 or 3 things that we need to do within that. We've talked about education at the grassroots level. It baffles me why it isn't being tackled. Legal sector. It really needs reform to move the needle forward. Healthcare. These are very basic things. And I think if we get them right, there is absolutely no reason why we wouldn't break through the growth rates of China. In fact, I really think if we do a few things right, we can be way ahead of them in terms of growth rates at this point in time. So I think benchmarking is important, not just to China, but to many other people.
We have invested in a company called Beijus, went up from 9 million pre on a 20 million base to 800 million in 4 years with Zuckerberg's family investing. So there are opportunities there in a B2C, not B2B, not in educating, but B2C because learning is getting disrupted. The process of education cannot get disrupted. The regulators have a stranglehold. But how we learn through technology is getting disrupted. Many companies look around, we can invest $1 billion.
I think, Shrinivas, your responses can be probably merged in, if you like. You can wrap it up.
Good evening, everyone. I think we've had a very, very interesting session. Chairman Arun, you've actually set the theme for the session in the beginning when you talked about so many positive changes happening in India. And I was the exception amongst all these guys because I really do hardcore, dirty businesses of commodities, actual manufacturing. And I've seen the kind of positive changes happening in policy. 10 years back, we had to fight for licenses. We had to adopt all sort of unfair means to get hold of licenses. Today, that is completely done away with. It's a very, very transparent process of auctions. Resource allocation is done in the most transparent manner. I just got my license in the bordering state of Maharashtra, And to be very honest about it, we applied and we got it within a period of a year. So I think those are the kind of positive changes that we are talking in the country. And I think that's really the hope for the future generation. Because a lot of convincing data was given by Mohandas. I think we have all the right parameters. If you look at our macroeconomic stability today, it's one of the best that India has had so far. We've had a very enviable record of $60 billion of FDI. That shows how US companies and the rest of the countries are looking at us. Our roads, I think we were building 20,000 kilometers till 2014, which has gone to 40,000 kilometers today. So just see the opportunities for large companies in the US to kind of feed the population there, which is ever hungry for consumption. But the only point here is, as Sunil made in the morning, I think Indian population is smart enough to recognize today the quality at the right price. I think that's something which works. We are very, very open. We are very transparent, as Mohandas says. We've welcomed every company that wants to enter India, but with some consideration for the rising middle class and also the people who are in abject poverty. I'll give you my personal experience. Somebody raised an issue on China and India, and I completely agree with you. We sold iron ore to Chinese steel companies. And I remember about 7 years back, one of the Chinese steel company chairmen took me and he said, you better increase your production because this land, and there were nothing less than about 500 houses there. We are going to acquire this land and we are going to set up an additional blast furnace. Now that's something which you can't think of in India, it's impossible. Because we give rights to our people, they have a right to debate what's wrong and right. The land is theirs. And exactly in 3 years, he called me for the opening of the new blast furnace, where the entire population was cleared, the land was given to the steel company. So it's very, very difficult to make a comparison of India and China, and that's why China is ahead in the race. I completely agree. But I think we have the right demographic dividend today, the right mindset, political stability, and I'm not trying to take any sides. I'm talking about the last 1 decade, which is 10 years, that we have seen a lot of positive changes happening in the Indian economy. I think Pramod talked about, and Mohandas talked about the whole entrepreneurial culture. I think this is the greatest thing for the next generation that is coming up. And I think what is actually required is sort of bridging the skilling. I mean, the gap between what actually is taught in our universities and colleges and what the population needs a lot of refinement and and that's where I think American universities can help, American educational institutes can help. Just to clarify, the current Indian rules and laws don't allow you to repatriate profits that you make out of education. But I think there's a lot of debate around this as to, when universities will be allowed. There has been a lot of debate on this. Some attempts by the government to say that the best quality education should come to the country because that will really benefit the population at large. So I think we've ended on a very positive note in the session, saying that the whole world is looking at India. We have a respectable amount of social infrastructure, and what Mr. Tharoor talked in the morning about the soft power cannot be ignored. I think that's India's one of the biggest strengths that we have. And when we compare to India and China, I think a lot of companies will choose India over China because you can actually have a say there. And there's one more point that I thought of making, which is my personal experience. What's positively happening is a lot of power is going to the state governments. I think the central government is deliberately trying to give more power to the state. So especially foreign companies, when they're confused as to who to go to, I think when you go to a particular state, although there's a lopsided development that Pramod talked about, certain states are doing very, very good, whereas certain states are not doing so well. But I think that's competition, and ultimately every state will sort of gear up depending on their capabilities and infrastructure that they have as to what is best for the state and how to. For example, I come from a very small state called Goa. And Goa is not ideally meant for manufacturing. So we've been having a lot of debate as to how we really, if we could kickstart a sort of a startup culture that Mohan talked about in his presentation. And what can be done there? It could be a mini Silicon Valley kind of an environment that we could start up in Goa and invite a lot of intelligent people to come and contribute there. So I think we'll do that. Yeah. So thanks once again to all the speakers. I think we've had a brilliant session. Mohandas's data was very, very convincing. I think, Arun, you are the biggest brand ambassador. You came after 4 decades back to India, and you are chairman of KPMG, which are our auditors, so we look forward to your contribution to the country. And Pramod has worked in a large company in the US and then started his own company. So that's a great amount of experience to share, and he shared a lot of positive thoughts about what India offered to him. So thank you.